It is the Pastor's Heart and Dominic Steele, and thanks for joining us. And the detail of the impact of COVID on churches. Top-level results for the National Church Life Survey are now out. We analyse them today with Ruth Powell and Peter Mayrick. Sunday church attendance across Australia is down, but the decline has slowed. Worryingly, the key newcomer indicator has also dropped to 5.7%. However, midweek small groups are up, and while evangelism is down, engagement in church-based service groups is up. We're going to take a long, hard look at the under the bonnet of the top-level survey results, asking how much is due to COVID and how much is due to other factors. Our two guests, Ruth Powell is the National Director for the National Church Life Survey, and we're also joined by Peter Mayrick. I call him the Church Doctor. He's a friend of the Pastor's Heart. He's with Partners in Ministry and the Centre for Ministry Development at Moore Theological College in Sydney. Now, let's start with you, Peter, and what's gone on with your Pastor's Heart as you looked at these results?
Hey there, Dominic. As I looked at the results, I thought, gee, I'm looking forward to 2023. I'm just conscious that pastors have had a hard year, 2 years, 3 years, and this has been the year where everybody else got tired as well. And so it's been really challenging to be leading a church. So that's where my heart is helping pastors get through to the end of this year and start 2023 as a new norm. I coach a few people in the Northern Hemisphere, and what I've noticed is the start of their year, which is September, seems to have started quite normally. So I'm hoping that means February is going to be reasonably
good month here. Ruth, as you looked at all these different results, was it a roller coaster of emotions, or just was it all going down?
Yeah, no. I have been doing this work for the churches for 30 years now. And so I'm a missionary kid, I'm a preacher's kid, and so we're still invested over that time to really trying to serve the church with giving them an authentic picture. And I guess this was the toughest National Church Life Survey ever, and it's been relentless and really challenging. And while other countries actually stopped doing their similar research projects, Australia actually was brave enough to say, and our church leaders were brave enough to say, we need to do it because we don't know what's going on. And so as I looked at the results, there was a fair bit of trepidation, seeing what was actually going to come out. And when I mapped out the story of the last 25, 30 years to see what's happening with that line, I actually found there was more encouragement than I was expecting. There are some things that have gone down, and of course we expected it, and it's there. In a sense, we wouldn't have trusted it if we hadn't seen some impact of COVID. It couldn't not have an impact. But there's more there to be encouraged than perhaps, I hope people are surprised and encouraged.
I mean, we did it at our church in December last year, but you were just telling me some of the churches, they're still doing it this weekend.
Most churches actually didn't do it in 2021. Most churches did it sort of between March and June, but they're still going, and there are churches doing it right now.
Right, okay. Now, we're going to run through some of your headings in this, and let's do decline in the big picture of attendance first. And you've got two ways of measuring it. You talk, and they said the same thing, monthly tracking and weekly tracking. We've put the monthly tracking up on the screen. What's going on there?
Yes, we've been tracking self-reported attendance. This is from sample surveys from across the country. We've been doing that for decades, and since the 1950s, it's plummeted down. Interestingly, it's plateaued, though, in the last few decades.
Right, and weekly attendance is very similar.
Same thing. We collect basically head counts from churches.
Right.
So the first one is general religious services, and this one is head counts from churches. And we've seen the same pattern since we started collecting it, where it was a decline in the 90s and earlier, and in fact has plateaued. Now that's up to 2016. We're yet to see the impact of COVID on the actual number of people who go to church.
Now, this next slide, you've said attendance was back to pre-pandemic levels in late 2021. That didn't ring true for me because we were going through the floor with Omicron just at that time. What's going on there? Why are we really back at pre-pandemic levels of attendance?
Well, we've been tracking those sample surveys I described we have been doing a sister project to the National Church Life Survey. The National Church Life Survey listens to people in churches and church leaders. This survey goes out to all Australians. It's a sample of Australians. So we have done that every year because really as a mission project, it's about listening to the community as well as the church. So that is the Australian community weighted to represent the Australian population from a random sample. They're all the statistical things you do and say to go, this is solid research. And the numbers do surprise, that we saw the numbers 2018, 2019, up to 2019, the percentage was going up. We saw a big drop in 2020, but in November 2021, we saw it pop up again. Now, we're doing that survey again in November 2022. So come back and I'll tell you how we go. But all I could do is report what the results were, even though they are a bit of a surprise.
What was your reaction on that, Peter?
I loved that data. I love this survey. The Australian Community Survey, the National Church Life Survey, NCLS Research has committed to keep doing it, because this is the sort of survey that tells you what Australians are thinking. Too often we look at the data of, and we think, everyone's against us. This keeps on reminding us that our country still regards Jesus. Our country still has people going to church. Even when COVID was really attacking us, people were still coming to church at least monthly.
But does that bounce back to 22% 2019, 21% 2021? Are you feeling that bounce back as you talk to pastors?
Look, there's a margin for error. And again, people talking online versus turning up. It's also monthly. But if you think about when it was done, which was Q4 last year, people were starting to come back.
They were coming back,
and people were desperate to come back. So it's a good read that the Australian church community is reasonably robust. There are some indicators that we want to note that might cause concern or should encourage us as we look towards the end of this year and next year. We should be working on things. But there are other indicators that we say, thank the Lord, we're coming through COVID. The Christian community is committed to church. The nominal community may not be. But the attenders, it's good data. So I'm really grateful that Ruth and the team keep on doing this Australian community survey.
Okay, let's go to weekly attendance and the denominational trends. And the graph we've put up only takes us through to 2016. Yes. Can you leak us any info? Actually, big picture. Big picture. You've got the trend there of decline for Catholic and mainstream Protestants, up for Pentecostal, and up for other Protestant churches. What's happened since 2016 to 21 there, Ruth?
Look, we don't know because we're still
collecting. You've got a hunch.
All right. Well, let's start with this. Actually, we've had to, after decades of saying the church is declining, part of our message is actually in recent times it's plateauing and perhaps it's popping back up. And I guess from up to what we knew before, that slide you just showed says that there is actually net growth when you put all the Protestants together. So net growth perhaps changes that stereotype that the church is, certainly the Protestant church is plummeting. So I guess that it's like a corrective.
We're putting liberal Protestant in with evangelical.
Except Catholics.
Everybody except Catholic.
Everybody except Pentecostal, all Protestants together. So that's like a corrective to the long-term narrative of decline, which is true when you put everybody, including the Catholics, together. So what's happening now? Look, my judgment, and this I will make the call, that I think we will see further decline. So even though I'm saying I think we're at a plateau at the moment and there's some signs, positive signs, great signs of young people orbiting and checking things out, nationally though, I'd say because of COVID, because the newcomer inflow has dropped, I'd say due to COVID, because that's gone down and because there's an ageing church in many denominations or in many parts of the country, you can't have less people coming in and more people, and I'll say dying out the other side and think that we're going to grow. So the reality is I think we've had a bit of a reprieve during the 90s and 2000s. I would expect another decline on the horizon unless something dramatic happens.
Which is simply inflow and outflow.
Yes.
And pharmaceutical industry hasn't solved death yet, so...
And that other piece of inflow is hanging on to your young people.
Yeah, that's right.
So unless we hang on to our young people and have new people from outside the church, unless that stays up above the death rate, it's just going to be a decline.
What's your sense of how the different denominations came through COVID?
We're still looking, and in fact, we haven't given. We've given some initial results to denominations. To every diocese, every state, every association has some initial results. So I have not looked at those results. I've just looked at the national picture.
Well, can I test a thesis? My sense was that the churches that had people most engaged in pastoral care networks came out of COVID stronger than the churches that did not have people as well engaged in pastoral care networks. Does the data back that up?
Well, I think there's two parts to that. One of the ways that we measure the health of the church, we've been talking about growth, which is one way of thinking. Is a church healthy? Is it growing in numbers? That's what we've been talking about. If we think about church health in terms of a range of measures, one thing churches should be doing is helping people in discipleship. They should be helping people grow in their faith. What we saw in this particular national survey is two things. Firstly, people say, not as many people say that my local church helped me grow in my faith. They are missing that collective corporate community, that faith community. And so there's a drop there. However, we saw an increase in small group attendance, people involved in Bible study prayer. And I think that's where people gravitated to, and that is where the faith was sustained and nurtured, even in a tough season where fewer people said, this has been
they went to Sunday.
An alive and growing faith. I've had an experience where my faith has really flourished. It hasn't, but they've sustained it.
Peter?
We had the opportunity to mine that data for one large denomination, Sydney Anglicans, and we were able to see that people who were growing in faith were more likely to invite, twice as likely to invite, 4 times as likely to be looking for someone to share their faith with, and twice as likely to be giving 10% or more. And when you come back to the inputs, inflow versus outflow, what's the one question that most impacts inflow? Well, have you invited someone to church in the last 12 months? During COVID, the second year of COVID, you didn't invite.
No.
Because how could you invite? You invite to a link.
The doors are closed.
And you did the link the year before. So some of the data is a little bit warped because of that. Also, inflows are warped. Having said that, when Ruth did the survey with the community survey and asked the question, even about Christmas, would you come to Christmas if you invited to a friend, to a church service? Extraordinary numbers of our community would accept your invite. And so there are real opportunities. But so you go back to small groups were helpful. People growing in their faith correlates with invitation and sharing faith. So discipleship becomes the language. I want to say almost every evangelical denomination coming out of COVID has realised we need to be disciplers. And the whole spectrum of evangelicalism is kind of talking discipleship, which I think is really exciting.
A national Pentecostal leader I was talking to said to me, as he looked at evangelicals going through COVID, he thought they were mostly tracking better than the Pentecostals, because the Pentecostals, it was so much emphasis on the worship experience rather than, if you like, the small group discipleship network. Had any sense of that?
I think the challenge for the church at the moment, whichever faith tradition you come from, is there is this yearning and response to reconnect. And that's wonderful because they say their belonging is lower, they're missing their faith community. Here's the challenge, that they'll go, I need to be discipled, so I'm going to do my small group work, meet with my friends, go back to my church, and they're going to lose sight of the mission of the church and discipling others. That's the risk right now coming out of COVID. And so if we're talking to evangelical churches, like, don't lose sight of that passion to actually think about your close friends and your family who are open, as you said, as we've said from the community survey, they're open for their close friends and family inviting them. But the church is hovering, going, I feel tired, we need to rebuild, we need to build community. And my challenge would be, don't forget to look beyond and remember what the church is about.
Beyond the walls is your line, which I greatly we grabbed that from you, Ruth. But I think that's it. The churches that do well have the full understanding of discipleship, make and mature.
Yes.
And it's easy to get caught internally, just looking inwardly at the mature, and to forget, actually, we want you to do that. Yeah. One of the comments I'll make about the Pentecostal church leaders I know, they have recognised that the growth perspective for Pentecostal churches, the large Pentecostal churches, has been something they've been watching for a while, probably a decade. So they've been thinking about discipleship pre-COVID. And it's a challenge when you've got a big congregation and the language you kind of hear is authentic experience rather than just experience. And it's quite a change management challenge to have people coming back wanting experience when you as a leader want to be saying, actually, this is a discipleship experience. This is an authentic...
So you're saying some of the Pentecostal leaders have moved way ahead in their thinking of the flock on that issue.
They've been thinking about this, many of them have been thinking about this for a long time. And that's why I say the full spectrum of evangelicalism is talking discipleship. Oh, what do you mean by that? Making and maturing. You hear that language out of a whole lot of denominations, and I'm excited by that.
Now, I'm just looking at the newcomers because we've kind of jostled around the edge of the newcomers. We'll put that screen up on the screen now. But we've gone from 9.3 in 2001 to 5.7. That's a crushing number.
It has. Look, the chart maybe looks a bit more dramatic than it is. Really, the message is newcomers have been stable for the whole time we've done the National Church Life Survey. 8%, 9% in Protestant churches. Pretty well stable. That's not something to write home about. But to drop down to 5.7, to me, that points to the impact of COVID.
Well, I don't know, because it's if you were saying it's a 1 year, I'd say yes, but this is I'm who's new in 5 years. Well, yes, you could say some of it is due to, a fifth of it is due to COVID, but you can't say all.
Fair enough, Dominic. That is fair enough. And I think, again, coming back to a point that Peter made, we know from our work on newcomers that people come because someone invited them and someone they have trusted relationship with. So again, it comes down to we looked at the trend for for inviting. It's gone down, and again we can go, oh, it's just COVID. There was nothing to invite to. The challenge again for the church is that has been going down for a while. So maybe we are reaping, as you say, a loss of confidence and a loss of capacity, or even just keeping your mind on the need to invite. That's a longer trend that we are reaping now.
So one of the things I look at in the NCLS survey when I'm working with a church is, that list of what you most value and the list of what you most look for. I'm looking for where do they value the newcomer or the new people, and where do they want for the next 12 months encouraging us to share and invite or engage new people. And that if that's low, I say, right, we've got a heart. We've got to really focus on that because they are lead indicators, I think, for the lag indicator of newcomer. Where's the heart? Which is where Ruth was saying it can't just be internally growing. It's got to be growing, and therefore...
Yeah, we certainly have seen this time. That is, what do you value and prioritise? The church is telling us we value spiritual growth, always have. We want more of that, but we value community, and we want that. First time that's come to the top of the list. Going, we want community, and it's like, that's lovely. We hear your loss of community, but do not lose sight of
spiritual growth.
Spiritual growth, but the wider community, actually God's mission in the world. Now,
the ageing numbers, continuing to age. What do we do? We've got to make the music younger.
We know from...
What else do we do?
big denomination, Sydney Anglicans, we know it across the large denominations in the other states. 3/4 of us became Christians before the age of 20. We need to make sure that we are bringing families into the church, we are looking after children, we are looking after youth, but we also recognise we lose, 50 to 65% of them by the time they leave home. They got churched, not discipled. And so there's this whole action that has to be there of bringing children to church, but making sure we disciple them. And that's a whole church effort. That's a grandparent effort, or a grand auntie effort, as well as a parent effort. That's, to me, one of the big things about the age. Young people, as Ruth has shown with the different community surveys, young people are open to the gospel. There's new data coming out which says Gen Z is a little kick up from Gen Y, and I'm thinking, thank you, Lord, they're more open.
That's right. That's right.
So we've got to keep our foot down on being confident, which is what the community survey data should encourage us to do. Be confident to talk about Jesus. Be confident to love community.
Just in terms of strategic decisions that senior pastors are going to be making, what do you do if you want to skew your church younger than the community around you?
Yeah, I would actually comment again that this is a whole church effort.
Yes.
We know that young people cluster. And we know there are many, many churches where there's only a very small number of young people. And I would say it takes a humility and a courage for pastors to actually release their young people, which may be a horrifying thought, but to actually say, we bless you, go where there are other young people, and we will work regionally in networks or whatever, because where there's a clustering, those young people will support each other and will transition through. And so when we know that there are these key moments, for example, the high school to university or high school to work, that is such a massive, that one drop off is when the kid says, I don't want to come to church with you. 14, I'm out, That's one moment. The next one is when they leave home or they become a young adult and transition. Those are the transition moments where the church is losing its young people. And if pastors together can actually go, I've got this wonderful group of young people, they're just finishing their HSC, I am going to intentionally help them transition and introduce them to pastors where they're going to university or where they're going to work, make sure they get settled in, connected in. That journey within the faith community, understanding a broader sense, I think could be something that...
And knowing the fragility of the year 12 to first year uni moment.
That year 13 is a really important year. The other one, though, that Graham Stanton brought to my attention was, he said, people leave at the age of 14 to 16, but they apparently made their decision at the age of 12, which is the primary school to high school transition. So transitions are really important.
We've had we've lost a few kids here where their parents have moved house just after the HS, and they were a little fragile on the edge of our church, but they didn't settle in the next place, and I just thought, don't move house at the end of year 12.
At any time, the reason most people say that they stop attending churches is not because they've had a fight, not because they disagree with something, it's because they moved house. So this is a general pattern of going, how do you help a family, a person, actually move churches when you move house? And there used to be old traditions, I think, in mainline denominations where, the rector would ring up the next one and say, I'd like to help transfer membership and they're coming to your town now. Not only for young people, but I actually think it's for everybody, is a really practical thing that I'd encourage pastors to do.
And Ruth, you come back to inflows and outflows. In the average Australian city, about 40% turnover in 5 years, every 5 years. A large number of those people call themselves Christians. So the greatest opportunity for growth is also just to, hey, let's invite those Christians along to connect into church.
Yes.
Sorry, Dominic.
I'm just going to skip forward to, you've done an analysis on a whole range of key factors that are going to make up a healthy church. And we talked about alive and growing faith a moment ago, but I want to talk about this vital and nurturing worship. And that's been on the rise and then sharp turn. Is that just due to COVID or more than COVID, do you think?
Look, it's a flattening. I would put that one down to COVID, and in fact, I would say the dip there is one of the things that could have been worse, And I hope that pastors are encouraged that there's a bit of a wet blanket, if you like, on the worship experience, but it could have been a lot worse. So I hope that all that effort they put into their online worship services and all that meant that they've actually done better than might have been the case.
Right. Peter?
Yeah.
I haven't seen the full Protestant set. I've only seen one denomination and then other individual churches. So I've found it actually quite resilient for a lot of the churches we work with. One of the things I like pastors to focus on is that preaching question, inspiration question, and the music question. Because what is surprising for most pastors is to see 80% of people sort of always or usually like the music. And how many gripes do you get about music? You need to have this built into your head when someone says, the music's terrible. Okay, you're one
voice. You're one of the 18%.
But pastors need to recognise preaching is appreciated. Inspiration is one of the ones that can often be increased, as can challenging to take. And I often think, what does that mean in each church? What are they thinking? But so there are areas to improve. But I'm actually surprised the data isn't worse. Given that it was online for so long.
Exactly.
Maybe as people were coming back, they said, thank the Lord. This is great.
And actually, it wasn't that good last November.
That's right.
We've seen a drop in belonging. That's been stable, but that's gone. I'm less... I mean, I suppose you'd say that's probably true in every social group across the community.
Yes, I would easily call this... That's been our, our boring indicator. It's like, there's belonging again. It's strong and stable, and everybody's happy. And of course, if they're not, we're not counting them. They're not doing our survey. Yeah. But to see that indicator actually shift down, that to me is clearly a COVID factor, and ties in with the earlier one I mentioned, which is people saying, my faith, I'm not feeling as much that my faith is growing due to my church. It also ties in with them saying we need to build community. Our priority should be on building community. That's a little set that all goes together. They value and they're missing their faith community.
It's funny, you said that. So Ruth has always said to me, belonging is the one you need to look at first. And for me, it's a boring indicator because it's usually up there. But you're right, when it's low, you got a real problem.
We've got big problems, yeah.
Which is why you go there first and thank the Lord that it's often boring.
Mind you, I'll just say, if you're a church that has been attracting a lot of newcomers, the church system, often belonging goes down. You should celebrate that because you've got a lot of new people who actually don't feel they belong, but they're transferring in, and you can see that your work is to
bring that belonging. Now, small group attendance went up on this, although I wondered if it's gone up because, all the people who were online and were saying yes were also the highly literate people who filled in their surveys and all got back together at the end, whereas I visited one church for a funeral late last year, and it was the first time that building had been opened in a long time, and I thought, actually, whoever was there once is almost not going to come back at all. Is that anecdote true across the board, do you think?
Well, I'm trying to make sense of two patterns that we've seen in here. One is that, as we've said, involvement in small groups, which is your Bible study, prayer groups, support groups. We've seen that go up, and we've already talked about the importance of community, and that's a way that people have stayed connected. The other thing that went up is involvement in church-based care, welfare, justice groups.
We'll put that up on the screen. We've got that one. It's the practical and diverse service slide, and we've gone down in kind of stable in community-based service groups, but up in church-based service groups. What are they? Is that the welcoming team, or is that?
No, that's when your church hosts a soup kitchen, or your church runs a community garden. It's when you're doing care or welfare or social action, but your church is the host, versus joining Meals on Wheels or the Rotary Club. Yeah. So there's a general volunteering in the community that's been stable for a long time, but we've been watching this. The church is running these missional activities, these bridge building activities, and we've been watching that go up, and that's a bit of a concern. But I didn't think it would go up this time, and it has. And I'm still
would you put
working
playgroup
that
in
out.
that?
Yes,
right.
yes,
Okay.
that's right. So the church is hosting something for the community.
So we've got playgroup,
Yeah.
divorce care.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it's rather though than your people volunteering in an activity that someone else runs and hosts. It's that your church is running it. So churches have been, in a sense, perhaps withdrawing on some front, but then actually going, well, let's start a playgroup, let's start a thing, rather than encouraging people to join the one down the road that the community runs. So that's an interesting thing to think about. But why, in the context of COVID, have church people said they're involved in church groups that reach out?
Yeah.
I think it's something to do with the same dynamic. And I've had anecdotally leaders say, oh yeah, our involvement in things was sustained or went up. It's like where you could find little groups of people or little ways of connecting, people really gravitated to that.
It started with those letterbox drops. Hi, I'm praying for you, or can I go and help? Can I help? That happened in that first month. I love the way that just went right through the church. I want to say, I think that small groups became really important through COVID. There are a few things about small groups I want to point out. They became really important. And they became so important that at the start of this year, quite a few small group leaders pulled out because they were tired at the end of last year. And I suspect that one thing that pastors will need to think about is rolling this year as well, because everyone's tired again. So that's one thing. Are we caring for our small group leaders? The second thing is that small groups have become even more important, therefore, if you're thinking about culture and alignment. The influence of a small group leader is enormous on the church culture. You've now got the big meeting and the small meeting. So one of the things I would be encouraging pastors to be thinking about between now and the start of next year is how we've got alignment amongst those people about what we are on about, and making that crystal clear in a tired environment.
And I think
what we're on about.
When I hear you say that, I think I think we had really good alignment in the lead up to COVID, but everything is raggedier now.
And so clarity and simple, because I think simplicity and clarity is going to be really, really important. The other thing that the small group will do is build or impact my confidence in the church. Because if I'm confident people are going to treat my friends well, I'm more likely to invite them along. When belonging is craved for, sometimes these small groups are where you can actually bring people in. So I think small groups are paramount. I want to say the other thing, though, about serving. We did some research just before COVID, which we commissioned with some non-Christian guys. We found there were two things that impacted faith sharing, where Australians judged. You already reported on the first one, scandal. Scandal means my ears are closed, I'm not listening.
And I don't want to say anything if I'm embarrassed about my leaders.
That's right. But the other one was when the church is doing good, my ears are open. And it was just fascinating to read. It was basically Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew coming out, the widows, the orphans, the disabled, So I think that the church getting a heart through COVID has been a really good thing. It's tiring, I get that, but it actually is good, ironically, for the mission as well, not just loving. And it's one of the things that we're aware of. It's one of the metrics that doesn't increase newcomers. But what we saw was that it actually does increase the response to invitation.
There's lots more to say.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming in. My guests on The Pastor's Heart, Ruth Powell, she's the National Director of the Australian National Church Life Survey, and Peter Mayrick, he's from Partners in Ministry and also the Centre for Ministry Development at Sydney's Moore Theological College. This has been Dominic Steele, and you've been on The Pastor's Heart with us. We will look forward to your company next Tuesday afternoon.